When Apollo crossed the finish line in a majestic trot, his golden mane rippling in the wind as the crowd erupted in thunderous applause, Clara Miller knew she was witnessing something far greater than an equestrian competition victory. It was the triumph of compassion over cruelty, patience over violence, hope over despair. But to understand how we arrived at this magical moment, we need to go back in time, to a sprawling estate on the shores of a silver lake where palm trees swayed in the warm breeze and where lived Homer Vance, a solitary and ruthless tycoon. He possessed countless assets, mansions sprawling across acres, yachts moored in private harbors, and art collections that would make international museums weep with envy. However, his proudest possession was Apollo, a magnificent ivory-colored Arabian stallion with amber eyes that shimmered like precious jewels even in the dim light of the stables. Homer had acquired Apollo for an astronomical sum at an exclusive auction in Dubai where only the world's wealthiest could compete. The stallion was a direct descendant of a royal lineage with a pedigree tracing back to the desert sheikh's horses. But behind this kingdom of ostentation, Apollo suffered in a way few could imagine. Homer, temperamental and results-driven, took out his deepest frustrations on the animal. The businessman's stress was fueled by billions of dollars in debt accumulated from risky investments, subtle enemies whispering in the corridors of power, and the constant pressure of maintaining his unshakable image of success. His escape valve had become a macabre routine, rhythmic whippings at dawn, blows that echoed through the corrals and stained the horse's pristine white coat red. The farmhands watched in silence, some averting their gaze, others hardening their hearts out of necessity. "This is how you train a champion," Homer would yell, his voice echoing through the yards like an imperial decree. "Discipline and rigor. You know nothing about excellence." Apollo lived in confinement, injured and terrified, his magnificent golden eyes losing their sparkle day by day. The stallion, who should have been a masterpiece of nature, had become a prisoner in his own body, trembling at the slightest noise, cowering when any human figure approached. That's when Clara Miller arrived in the area. A newly graduated equine veterinarian, she had specialized in animal behavior and psychological trauma in horses. Clara came from a humble family in the countryside, the daughter of a retired blacksmith and an elementary school teacher. She had achieved her education through scholarships and hard work, mucking stalls during college to pay her expenses. Driven by dreams of rehabilitating traumatized animals, Clara heard rumors of Homer's barbaric practices through whispers among local veterinarians. "That man is destroying one of the most beautiful horses that ever lived," Dr. Anthony, an experienced veterinarian who had treated Apollo a few times, murmured, "but he has so much money and influence that no one dares to question him." Clara couldn't get those words out of her head. At night, in her small rented apartment, she researched Apollo, finding pictures of the stallion in his past glory, a majestic animal with a proud bearing and intelligent gaze. The difference between those images and the stories she heard was heartbreaking. "If only I could help him," she whispered to herself. "If only I could show the world that there's another way." The opportunity arose unexpectedly. Homer, pressured by creditors and needing quick cash, discreetly announced that he would put Apollo up for sale at a private auction. The news spread through veterinary circles like wildfire. Clara knew she didn't have the resources to compete with other buyers, but something inside her drove her on. She sold her car, borrowed against her parents' name, and even organized an online campaign among friends and colleagues. "There are stories that deserve to be told," she wrote on her social media, "and I believe we can all make a difference when we choose to act with compassion." Those who had followed her journey from the beginning knew Clara wouldn't give up. If you're enjoying this story of transformation and hope, consider subscribing to our channel to continue receiving inspiring stories like this, stories that remind us of the power of empathy and human determination. The day of the auction arrived. Clara entered the elegant venue wearing her only suit, an heirloom from her grandmother, nervous but determined. Around her, businessmen in Italian suits and expensive jewelry placed bids as if they were buying stocks on the exchange. The price quickly escalated: $1 million, $2 million, $3 million. When it seemed Clara would be completely outbid, something extraordinary happened. Homer, watching from a private box, noticed the quiet determination of the young veterinarian. There was something in her eyes that reminded him of himself decades ago, when he was still fighting for his dreams tooth and nail. "Who is that woman?" he asked his assistant. "Clara Miller, a new veterinarian in the area, an expert in animal behavior." Homer was silent for a long moment. Perhaps it was the fatigue of the past few months, or the constant pressure, or simply a moment of rare clarity, but something made him make an impulsive decision. Sell him to her. "Sir, sell Apollo to the veterinarian," for the price she offered. Clara couldn't believe it when the auctioneer announced, "Sold to Miss Clara Miller." She had offered $300,000, a sum that would leave her in debt for years, but it was a fraction of the stallion's real value. Unlike everyone else seeking the prestige of displaying a thoroughbred, Clara secured custody transfer without demanding immediate ownership. No one doubted that she, a woman with a gentle voice and tender gaze, would not seek financial gain from the animal. Her intention was clear: rehabilitation, not exploitation. Near a native woodland, Clara set up Apollo in a rehabilitation center she'd built through a land swap with a local farmer. It was a renovated barn with soft rubber flooring, bales of organic hay, and, most importantly, plenty of space for the stallion to move freely. The first meeting between Clara and Apollo was heartbreaking. The stallion, who should have been a majestic creature, was visibly traumatized. His eyes, which once shone with intelligence and vivacity, now showed only fear and distrust. Scars crisscrossed his body like a map of suffering. "Hi, handsome," Clara whispered, keeping a respectful distance. "I know you're scared. I would be too. But we'll work together, at your pace, in your way." Apollo recoiled, trembling, but something in her voice caused his ears to twitch slightly. It was the first sign that perhaps there was still hope. Clara introduced alternative therapies she had studied for years. Daily acupuncture sessions with fine needles helped release accumulated muscle tension. Gentle massages dissolved stress knots, always respecting the animal's space. Sunrise's walks helped Apollo learn, gradually, to trust human touch again. "Healing isn't a destination," she wrote in her journal. "It's a journey, and every step, however small, is a victory." Meanwhile, the stallion slowly recovered, but carried within him the memory of chains of pain. There were nights when he woke up trembling, whinnying softly, as if he could still feel the sting of the whip. Clara slept near the stable on those occasions, her constant presence a silent reminder that he was safe. Clara faced significant resistance. Old-school veterinary colleagues doubted the effectiveness of unconventional methods. "This isn't veterinary medicine," grumbled Dr. Rodriguez, a more experienced veterinarian. "This is a waste of time. Horses need strict discipline." Foreman from the original farm announced that the stallion would return to his former owner as soon as he was ready to sell. And investors who had contributed to the purchase demanded quick results. "When will he start competing?" they constantly asked. "When will we see a return on our investment?" Clara, however, maintained her purpose with unwavering determination. "Apollo isn't an investment," she calmly replied. "He's a soul that needs healing, and souls don't operate on business schedules." Secretly, she studied Apollo's temperament, consulted with behavioral therapists specializing in animal trauma, and implemented cues that restored the horse's lost autonomy. A small trail along the creek running through the property became the scene of an extraordinary discovery. It was one autumn morning, when the mist still kissed the surface of the water, that Clara saw something that made her heart race. Apollo, who had spent months walking cautiously, suddenly raised his head, his nostrils flared, and he took his first free trot since arriving at the rehabilitation center. It was a symbolic milestone that the shackles of fear were finally breaking. His hooves touched the ground with a lightness not seen in a long time. His mane rippled in the morning breeze, and for a moment Clara saw the magnificent stallion he was always destined to be. "Oh my God," she breathed, tears rolling down her cheeks. "You're coming back to us." Months passed. Apollo's transformation was remarkable. His golden eyes regained their brilliance, his body gained healthy muscle mass, and his personality, intelligent, playful, affectionate, began to emerge. He developed a morning ritual of greeting Clara with a gentle nudge of his muzzle on her shoulder, as if saying good morning in his silent language. When Apollo finally crossed the track in a loose trot, his mane shimmering in the wind like threads of golden silk, Clara realized that life had given her more than the hope of healing. She had found a companion for her journey. They had become a team, united by a trust that transcended species. And gradually, stories about the rehabilitation miracle began to spread through the press and social media. Local journalists, initially skeptical, were impressed by the transformation. "The veterinarian who saved the stallion from a cruel fate," headlines proclaimed. Videos of Apollo running freely through the pastures went viral, touching hearts around the world. What no one expected was the greater impact to come. Homer, who had discreetly followed Apollo's progress through mutual acquaintances, was facing a storm of emotions. Part of him felt proud of having made the right decision to sell the stallion to Clara. Another part felt threatened by the growing media attention, fearing that his reputation might be tarnished by revelations about his past treatment of the animal. Thirsty for control and fearing the repercussions, Homer orchestrated a bold plan. He publicly announced that he would fund a major international equestrian competition, inviting Clara and Apollo to participate. In interviews, he loudly proclaimed that this would be the stallion's final act, an opportunity to prove whether he had truly recovered completely. "Can alternative methods really prepare a horse for high-level competition?" he questioned in television interviews, his voice laced with barely concealed skepticism. "We'll see if all this talk about compassion and holistic therapy really works when the pressure is on." Clara knew it was a trap. Homer hoped Apollo would fail, proving that his soft methods were inferior to traditional training techniques. But she also recognized a unique opportunity to show the world that there was a different way. "What do you think, boy?" she asked Apollo on a sunny afternoon, stroking his mane. "Are you ready to show the world who you really are?" Apollo whinnied softly, as if perfectly understanding what was being asked of him. The months of preparation for the competition were intense, but unlike any training Apollo had ever experienced before. Clara based the entire preparation on mutual trust, communication, and respect. There were no whips, no shouting, no punishments. Instead, there was patience, encouragement, and a genuine partnership between human and animal. "Training isn't about breaking an animal's spirit," Clara explained to the few journalists who sought her out. "It's about creating a harmonious dance between two minds that respect each other. When you force, you might get obedience. When you invite, you get excellence." Apollo responded to each session with growing enthusiasm. He began anticipating the training sessions, running to Clara when she arrived at the stables. His jumps became smoother, his movements more graceful, his confidence more solid. The tournament finally arrived. The competition was held at the most prestigious racetrack in the region, with a track illuminated by professional spotlights, packed grandstands with thousands of spectators, and cameras from international broadcasters transmitting live to the entire world. Homer watched from a VIP box, enveloped in an impeccable tuxedo, his face hardened by years of relentless business dealings. He had invited journalists, businessmen, and public figures to witness what he secretly hoped would be Clara's downfall, and proof that his old methods were superior. Clara, wearing ceremonial attire, but maintaining the calm of someone who completely trusts the bond with her companion, prepared Apollo backstage.
She could feel the curious and sometimes skeptical glances of the crowd, but her attention was completely focused on the stallion. "We got here together," she whispered, resting her forehead against his. "No matter what happens today, you've already won. You've already proven that healing is possible, that rebirth is possible. Now let's just have fun."
In that imposing arena, the past of pain and the present of overcoming converged in every movement of Apollo. When the jury announced the classic jumping event, the most challenging of the competition, the world seemed to fall silent. The course was intimidating. 12 obstacles, including 8-foot-high walls, complex combinations requiring millimeter precision, and a final sequence that would test not only the horse's physical ability, but also its courage and confidence. Clara mounted Apollo, and they positioned themselves at the starting line. For a moment, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Upon opening them, she saw Homer in the box, his expression tense and expectant. "Let's go, my friend," she murmured. The signal sounded. Apollo set off with a grace that made the crowd hold its breath. His gallop was rhythmic, powerful, yet controlled. The first jump was impeccable. The stallion soared into the air as if he had wings, his forelegs elegantly tucked, landing with the softness of a feather. Second jump, third, fourth, each obstacle was overcome with an ease that seemed almost supernatural. Apollo wasn't just jumping, he was dancing with the air, expressing years of pain transformed into pure art. The crowd began to murmur, then to sigh, then to clap timidly. Something magical was happening on that track. The stallion, who had been broken by violence, was demonstrating a strength that came from a place much deeper than fear. It came from love, trust, true healing. The 9th jump was particularly challenging, a double wall that required not only height but also distance. Apollo approached with determination, perfectly calculated the takeoff, and flew over the obstacle with a safety margin that made even the most experienced judges shake their heads in admiration. When they reached the last obstacle, the highest and most intimidating of all, Clara felt Apollo gather all his energy. She could feel his muscles contracting, his breathing deepening, his concentration intensifying. "Now, my beautiful boy," she whispered. Apollo exploded from the takeoff line with a force that seemed to come from his very heart. He soared into the air, his hind legs propelling him upwards, his mane billowing like a victory flag. For a moment, suspended in time, horse and rider floated over the stadium lights. The landing was perfect. Apollo touched the ground with the precision of a dancer, balanced instantly, and crossed the finish line in a majestic trot that caused the crowd to erupt in thunderous applause. The audience was on its feet, applauding wildly. People were openly weeping, moved by the beauty of what they had just witnessed. Homer slowly rose from his chair, his face a mask of conflicting emotions: pride, admiration, and perhaps, for the first time in years, a flicker of humility. Clara dismounted and hugged Apollo, feeling every muscle of his breathing with what could only be described as gratitude. "You were perfect," she whispered, tears freely rolling down her cheeks. "You showed the world who you really are." The announcement of the result brought a tense silence to the stadium. The judges deliberated for long minutes, reviewing every movement, every jump, every detail of the performance. Finally, the chief judge approached the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, in all my years judging equestrian competitions, I have rarely seen a performance as technically perfect as it was emotionally moving. The winner of the classic jumping event, with a perfect score and an extraordinary time, is Apollo, ridden by veterinarian Clara Miller." The stadium exploded. Apollo was consecrated not only as the winner, but as the grand champion of the entire competition. There was something poetic about the victory. A horse who had been broken by cruelty was now being celebrated for his excellence, achieved through love and patience. At that crucial moment, Homer did something that surprised everyone. He descended from the box, crossed the track towards the center of the arena, and stopped in front of Clara and Apollo. All the audience's attention was focused on him. For a long moment, he simply looked at the stallion. Apollo, who once trembled with fear in his presence, was now calm and confident, his head held high with dignity. "I made a mistake," Homer said, his voice amplified by the arena's microphones. "A terrible mistake. I thought strength was synonymous with cruelty, that discipline meant pain. But looking at Apollo now, I see I was completely wrong." He took a riding crop from his jacket, the same one he had used to injure Apollo, and extended it to Clara. "This represents everything bad I did, everything I should never have done. I want you to have this, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that we can always choose a different path." And Apollo? He continued to be the perfect ambassador of transformation. Every horse that arrived at the center received a special visit from the Golden Stallion, as if he intuitively understood that his role was to show others that healing was possible. On sunny afternoons, Clara and Apollo still walked together along the trail by the stream where it all began. He continued to greet her with the gentle touch of his muzzle on her shoulder, a ritual that had become sacred between them. "You changed more than your own life," she whispered to him on those occasions. "You changed all of our worlds." And so, each whinny of Apollo echoed as a powerful invitation. Life can always be reborn, even when one thinks everything is lost. Love can always triumph over fear. Compassion can always overcome cruelty. And hope can always be born from the ashes of despair. Apollo's story became a legend, not only in the equestrian world, but anywhere people believed in the power of transformation. And every time someone questioned whether change was possible, whether healing was possible, whether a new beginning was possible, the answer came in a form of an image. A golden stallion running freely in the wind, his mane rippling like a victory flag.